There's a funny thing that happens every offseason when the Blue Jays make a move that doesn't immediately scream superstardom. The noise level stays low, the headlines stay polite, and the baseball world sort of nods along as if to say, yes, that's sensible, before moving on to something louder. And yet, every so often, those are the moves that end up changing everything. That's where my mind keeps drifting when I think about Kasima Okamoto, because the more I sit with this signing, the more it feels like the calm before a very loud storm. I'll be honest with you, when the news first dropped, I had that brief, instinctive shrug that years of baseball cynicism have trained into me. A productive hitter from Japan, solid reputation, good approach, fine power. I've heard that story before. I even caught myself thinking, almost dismissively, another contact first bat. And then I did what I always do when something nags at me. I started digging. And somewhere between the numbers, the context, and the uncomfortable realization that I'd underestimated him, the tone of this story changed completely. Because this isn't just a tidy addition. This isn't a depth move dressed up as ambition. This is a player whose statistical fingerprints are all over the kind of offensive profile the Blue Jays have been chasing, sometimes desperately, for years. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Kasima Okamoto doesn't just fit, he threatens to disrupt the entire narrative around this lineup. What really stopped me in my tracks were the underlying numbers, the ones that tell you how a hitter thinks, not just how often he gets lucky. His OPS plus sitting in the absolute top percentile in NPB isn't just impressive, it's domineering. That's not a player sneaking through cracks. That's a player standing above the field and daring pitchers to find a weakness. And when you layer in his isolated power, again flirting with the very top of the scale, you start to realize this isn't empty production. This is controlled violence at the plate. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and frankly, where I started to smile, because power hitters, especially those crossing leagues, often come with a catch. They swing big, they miss big, and the adjustment period can be brutal. Okamoto doesn't play that game. His strikeout rate is remarkably low for someone with his power output, and his walk rate sits right up there with the elite. That combination tells a very specific story. This is a hitter who knows exactly what he's doing. He knows when to attack, when to wait, and when to let someone else carry the load. In other words, he understands innings, not just at-bats. If that sounds familiar, it should. That patient, grinding, slightly maddening approach is baked into what the Blue Jays have been trying to be. Fouling off pitches, refusing to chase, forcing mistakes. Last season, it felt like that identity flickered in and out like a faulty light. Okamoto doesn't flicker. He hums, and I can already picture David Popkins watching his tape with something approaching joy, because there's a shared language there, a philosophical alignment that could make this transition far smoother than people expect. And let's talk about the power in practical terms, because this isn't theoretical. For years in Japan, Okamoto was essentially penciled in for 30 home runs, as if it were routine. Last season's lower total comes with a massive asterisk because he simply didn't play a full slate of games. Stretch that pace out, and we're right back in familiar territory. This isn't a flash-in-the-pan spike. This is sustained, repeatable damage, the kind that makes pitchers adjust first. There's also this persistent argument floating around, usually delivered with a knowing tone, that NPB pitching just isn't comparable. And yes, the depth is different, the velocities are more uniform here, the margins smaller. But here's the thing, approach travels, plate discipline travels, power that doesn't rely on selling out travels. Okamoto has faced elite arms before and looked perfectly comfortable doing it. Against Yoshinobu Yamamoto, in admittedly limited opportunities, he didn't just survive, he thrived. Tiny sample size? Absolutely. Meaningless? Not at all. It tells you he's not overwhelmed by quality. He recognizes it, respects it, and still believes he can win. What I find most compelling, though, is the floor. Baseball is cruel to players with narrow skill sets. Take away one thing and the whole structure collapses. Okamoto walks into Major League Baseball carrying multiple weapons. Even if the power dips initially, the on-base skills remain.
Even if the contact rate tightens, the strength still plays. Something is going to work. And when you combine that with the upside, that tantalizing possibility that everything clicks at once, you start to understand why this signing could age beautifully. Projection systems, bless their cautious little hearts, are hedging their bets. A mid-250s average, low 770s OPS, low 20s home runs, perfectly respectable, perfectly safe, and perfectly unexciting. I don't buy it. Not because projections are useless, but because they struggle with context and personality. They struggle with players who don't fit neat boxes. When you compare Okamoto's contract and profile to similar deals in recent years, the names that emerge aren't placeholders, they're impact bats. Christian Walker types, Teoscar Hernandez types, guys that lengthen lineups and change how opponents pitch. And here's where I allow myself a little grin. Because if this does break right, if Okamoto becomes what his tools suggest he can be, the Blue Jays may have quietly replaced something they lost without ever announcing it. That middle-of-the-order thump, that protection, that sense that there's always another problem waiting for the pitcher. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. remains the sun around which this offense revolves, but every solar system needs more than one source of gravity. Okamoto feels like a second pull. I keep coming back to the idea that he was overlooked, overshadowed by louder names, younger phenoms, flashier narratives, and baseball history is littered with players who made careers out of resenting that. There's an edge to Okamoto's profile that I like, a sense that he's arriving with something to prove, even if he doesn't say it out loud. So yes, this is me on the Blue Jays Report, planting a flag earlier than most. If you're enjoying these deep dives and want to stay ahead of the curve with us, you know the drill. Give the video a like, share it with another Jays fan who's still on the fence, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because this story isn't just about numbers, it's about expectation, perception, and the delicious possibility that the quiet signing becomes the loudest voice in the room. When the season starts and the lights come on, Okamoto won't be trying to shock Major League Baseball. He'll simply be himself, and if the evidence holds, that might be more than enough to leave the league blinking in disbelief, wondering how they didn't see it coming.